Listen to podcasts of Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Well, not state representative, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Well done, Minneapolis. Is
proud of yourselves?
In the news again. I'll tell you what, I applaud her consistency. She is willing to be critical of both parties in order to advance Islamist views over American values. And if she needs to rewrite history, that's not a problem. 2017 tweet about the operation in Mogadishu, Somalia, 1993. She tweeted in response to somebody else on Twitter who was memorializing the 18 U.S. soldiers who were killed in Mogadishu on a mission to take out a warlord's top lieutenants, a warlord who was starving the people of Mogadishu against the backdrop of a famine in Ilhan Omar's home country of Somalia that took 300,000 lives. A humanitarian mission by America, executed by American soldiers to try and prevent people from starving to death in the country from which Ilhan Omar hails. And fortunately for her, she was lucky to get out and emigrate to this country. And she has this to say. In his selective memory, he forgets to also mention the thousands of Somalis killed by the American forces that day, exclamation point, hashtag not today, Satan.
And she wrote this 2 years ago. I mean, this wasn't written a long time ago or back when it happened. This was recent.
She's right. She's not a child.
Right.
Well, she is a child, but not in such a way that she's not responsible for what she says and does. Sergeant Major Kyle Lamb, who was there, was on Tucker last night to respond.
No, we didn't do that. We were trying to take out Adid because he was a clan leader that had, the Habagar clan had kind of taken over the town. They were taking the food, any of the aid that we were giving to Somalia, also weapons, and they're running drugs. Khat is a big drug over there. And he needed to be eliminated so that we could get peace back in that town. So we were actually there to help some of the lesser tribes or the lesser clans, such as her clan, which, obviously they were already gone. But, we were there to try to do the right thing. And the other thing is we didn't say, hey, let's pick out Somalia as a great place to go hang out. The president at the time, President Clinton, said this is where we're going, this is what the mission is, and our commander said, roger that, we can do it, and we all had signed on the line. That's why we serve, and you can make a difference when you go to those countries.
And Sergeant Major Lamb continued, set up with a little bit of historical context from Tucker, Sergeant Major Lamb on Omar's tweet, what it means to him and his brothers in arms.
Here's someone who was brought to the United States at public expense simply because we're a kind country that accepts a lot of refugees. And rather than being grateful for that, she spent the rest of her life attacking this country. Why?
Well, as they would say down here in Tennessee, bless her heart. I mean, we want her to understand that she's living large now because of her family being able to escape the atrocities of Mogadishu. And yeah, it's very disturbing. We watched our friends get drugged through the streets by the people that she says are her people. And we got to watch that on TV once we'd exfilled from the crash site that I was at, and we got back to our hangar. That's what we got to watch. So, yeah, we take it personal when you attack us like that. Once again, it's not surprising to hear that. There's been kind of a long list of things she said that I don't know if she meant them or not, but she continues to say them. So, yeah, I feel bad for her.
She is a pitiful, hateful human being. And, I guess if she continues to say them, you should start believing that's what she really believes.
Well, if America's so horrible and we're a bunch of Satanists running around, why doesn't she just pack up her things and go back to Somalia? Real simple.
That's a question for Minneapolis voters to answer, I suppose. But for more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He's the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, also a former U.S. soldier himself, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander. His book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So how much of an embarrassment is Representative Omar to American Muslims?
Well, I think to the majority, she's a significant embarrassment. And, this story particularly hits home for me. This is reported by John Rosamando from the Investigative Project on Terrorism. I graduated from the Medical College of Wisconsin up in Milwaukee in 1992, and then did my officer training, internship, and then served in Operation Restore Hope on the USS El Paso. So I joined my ship as they returned from that theater and got to know many of the folks that had family members and fellow soldiers with their bodies dragged through the streets of Mogadishu. And what you should learn from her narrative there is not only that it was 2 years ago, but this is the narrative of many of the Islamists, and you wonder why her district has the highest radicalization ratio, where you had jihadis going from Minnesota to serve in Somalia with al-Shabaab and serve in ISIS, because the narrative of radicalization is that America is the problem, the West is the problem. When I came back from serving in Operation Restore Hope, I went to the Islamic Society of North America. I talk about it in my book, how the Somali Relief Fund had brochures saying how America is imperializing the Horn of Africa when we were actually simply on a humanitarian mission, as Tucker and his hero, the guest yesterday, talked about. Basically, we were there to try to stop a famine. It was called the CNN War because we were pulled into battling warlords, and simply the UN decided we were trying to take food there, and the food became a weapon, and our soldiers tried to prevent that from happening, and we ended up having to protect ourselves. And as she responded to the tweet from Al Franken 2 years ago, her senator basically said another act was a significant act of terror. She said, no, the Americans were the ones who killed the most Somalians. So it serves Americans to notice that there are many in our leadership, in our Muslim community, that look at America as the problem, as the devil, rather than as the solution. All the while they serve benefits, and they end up leading our community. And the Pelosi's of the world take pictures with them on the front cover of Rolling Stone, Vogue, and other magazines. They get propped up in identity politics, and nobody looks at their ideology. And the rest of us Muslims become victims because most of us reject her leadership, reject their ideas, and the organizations that are radicalizing our community.
But how is it that she wasn't properly vetted by the DNC? I mean, they could have looked back to her tweets, and for her to say, "Not today, Satan," when she's referring to Americans and our soldiers, they let that was, I mean, somebody had to have seen it, and they just, ignored it?
Well, all you need to do is look at the process in which she rose there. Congressman Ellison was the previous congressman in that district. He propped her up as sort of his replacement, and no matter what was brought up about her background, about her, she even had a conviction and other things that were ignored because of
immigration, the allegations of immigration fraud.
Exactly. A lot of other things involved, but nobody wanted to vet it because she was going to become the face of sort of the women's movement, refugees, against the so-called Muslim ban, all the things that she checked the right boxes. It didn't matter what her ideology was. And now she's emboldened with the AOC and Rashida Tlaib and others. She's sort of become the tail wagging the dog of the Democratic Party. And as you can tell now this week with this story that John broke, they're ignoring it. They don't even want to touch it because they realize if America starts to pay attention to what her ideas really are vis-a-vis our American troops, they will not last long at all the while the Democratic Party is calling for prisoners and former terrorists to get votes out of prison. You realize that they're becoming very radicalized, and actually maybe she does represent what the Democratic Party stands for today.
Indeed. Speaking of which, and turning to the massacre of Christians in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday, I'm sorry, I used the C word. The massacre of Easter worshipers on Sunday. I want to be Washington Post compliant. Christianity under attack, ? Sri Lanka church bombings stroke far-right anger in the West. That was the Washington Post's headline. So I just want to make sure it's not just far-right conservative Christians, like apparently me, who are upset about 350 people being massacred, another 500 people being injured. That other people are upset too. Am I too far afield on this, or is the Washington Post?
No, the Washington Post it's bizarre the left twisting of the reality of what's happening. The attack in Sri Lanka, and then they also tried to say that it was a revenge attack from the New Zealand mosque terror attack, which doesn't make sense because it turns out that cell was in planning for 2 to 3 months. It turns out that the imam had videos, and there were reports from Muslims actually in Sri Lanka that the cell was going to commit an act a month in advance. So this didn't happen only after the New Zealand mosque attacks, but yet they constantly, when it's about Muslims, you'll see President Obama, Hillary Clinton talk about the Muslim community. We need to protect them and come to their aid, etc. And yet when it's attack against Christians, they won't even mention the word. And I can tell you, as a devout American Muslim, I don't want to live in a country where any religion is minimized in its religious freedom and its identity, because when Christians feel comfortable to practice their faith and we defend them across the world, we will then also defend Muslims. So the left actually, it's because of their hate for Christianity that they don't want to defend them, and then that also then will end up leading to a hate towards Islam and other faiths, because they're simply using us when it serves their purpose politically and not because they really care about our faith.
That is such a strong point that you just made, and so true. But I want to get back to this fatal security lapse. They even interviewed an ISIS member in India, and the Indian government called Sri Lanka and said an attack is imminent. It's going to happen. Why do you think the Sri Lankan government just ignored warning after warning?
Well, bottom line is this is another act in a global war that ISIS is reconstituting after they lost their ground in Syria and Iraq. The Sri Lankans have some internal political fighting that's happened. The Indian intelligence and other intelligence reported to them things happening, and apparently the political infighting caused them to ignore it and push it under the rug, and even because look at how much chatter would have to be involved to have 8 bombs go off at the same time across the island of the entire country in 7 different locations in order for them to ignore it and miss it. So there was a huge lapse there. It's from the dysfunction of the government and its security apparatus. And I think you'll see ISIS will hit where they see vulnerability, where they see weakness, and also where they see a message. So Easter Sunday was a significant message to send, as it was in the hotels that they hit with tourism and Western influence. And, the ISIS Islamists divide the world into the land of Islam and the land of war. They're losing in the land of Islam, where they lost their territory in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. So they'll turn to the land of war to start to get more recruits. And if anyone thinks that the war against ISIS is over, they need to realize, look in Congo, there was a thwarted attack in Saudi Arabia, and the attack in Kabul a few weeks ago. They are more active than ever, so please, we cannot be complacent. We need to have a long-term strategy against the global jihad.
So you have no question in your mind, ISIS claiming credit, late after the arrests were made of this imam and other radical Islamists in Sri Lanka. You have no question that this was not an independent radicalized imam and his friends. This is ISIS-inspired, if not underwritten.
Absolutely. And Dan, let me make 2 really important points. Number one of the reasons for the delay is they released information on which one was wearing belts, which one was just threw a bomb. They released information on the names and pictures, and then they did it through avenues which didn't allow tracing. So that doesn't happen within 12 hours. They wanted to make sure it's successful, and then they released it 2 to 3 days later. So that was pretty much strategic. The second thing is that little imam, who people think is just from a little cell, had pictures last year taken with Imam Qaradawi, the leading sheikh out of Qatar, who has the largest program on Sharia and life out of Al Jazeera. So this connection to global political Islam, Qatar has featured Qaradawi with Brookings Institute and other major Western think tanks. So this little cell, again and again, shows to be a known wolf, not lone, but known wolf, connected to Islamist propaganda outfits that are global out of Qatar and elsewhere. So people need to make these connections and realize that we're not only losing the whack-a-mole program, but we're losing the global ideological program.
Great stuff, as always, from Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, President of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Appreciate you filling in the blanks for us and our audience. Former U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander, and again, pick up his book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, pleasure as always. Thank you.
Anytime.